This is the short story of the KV-8, a Colossus heavy flamethrower tank that caused terror in the German ranks. A flamethrower tank's purpose is to support infantry during the assault on fortified enemy positions. The first experiments with flamethrowers on tanks were made during the First World War, but flamethrower tanks became popular in the 1930s. They were heavily used in World War II, as well as in the following conflicts, only to be phased out by the end of the 20th century. But back in 1932, the Revolutionary Military Council of the USSR adopted a resolution on giving the mechanized brigade chemical and other means to fight the enemy's entrenched infantry. The T-26 light tank, which was put into mass production the preceding year of 1931, was chosen as the basis for the first flamethrower tank. In the USSR, these tanks were named chemical tanks instead of flamethrower tanks because they were equipped with smoke launchers and could use the cannon and hoses to spray other chemical or toxic substances. In the years before Operation Barbarossa, more than 1,300 flamethrower tanks of different models and variants were produced in the USSR. The Red Army used flamethrower tanks in the battles of Lake Hassan in 1938 and Hachingol in 1939, as well as in the Winter Wall. These experiences showed that the flamethrower tanks were effective but very vulnerable to enemy fire. So, by the beginning of Operation Barbarossa, these light chemical and flamethrower tanks were very much obsolete, as most of the Soviet tank park. Let us remember that the superior Soviet tank designs, such as the T-34 and the KV-1, were just a drop in the bucket of the Soviet tank park in the summer of 1941. Design and production of better protected flamethrower tanks was passed to these two better armored designs, namely the T-34 and the KV-1 tanks. The OT-34 would later become the most produced flamethrower tank of World War II, and indeed of history. According to Ardashiev and Fedosiev in Flamethrower Tanks of World War II, Armor Collection, Special Issue No. 8 of 2005, up to 1,501 flamethrower tanks based on the T-34 design, and only a maximum estimated number of 139 KV-8 and KV-8S tanks were produced. In 1941, the KV-8 production had to wait until 8 main tractor and tank factories had been evacuated to Chelyabinsk in the east, very close to the Ural Mountains. These factories, which included the important Leningrad Kirov plant and the Kharkov Motor Plant No. 75, were collectively called Tankograd or Tank City. The tank design was pretty much the same as the KV-1, but the 76.2mm gun was, of course, replaced by a smaller 45mm gun, since there was no more space available in the turret after the installation of an ATO 41-piston flamethrower. The KV-8s, together with the more numerous OT-34 flamethrower tanks, were organized into separate battalions of flamethrower tanks, very much like the separate heavy tank regiments we discussed in the KV-1 episode. They included 2 companies of KV-8s, with 5 KV-8s in each company, and 1 company of OT-34s composed of 9 OT-34s and 2 T-34 normal medium tanks, one of them being the battalion commander's tank for a total of 11 tanks. Now, this is the most famous combat account of the KV-8 flamethrower tank, in the words of General Lieutenant or Lieutenant General Vasily Ivanovich Chuikov, commander of the 62nd Army and hero of Stalingrad, and I quote, "We rescued 3 tanks that were previously knocked out by the Germans, 1 flamethrower and 2 medium tanks. They were repaired and I decided to surprise the enemy. On the morning of the 29th of October, I sent the 3 tanks and 50 riflemen to counterattack in the junction between the divisions commanded by Smekhatborov and Guriev along Samarkandskaya Street. where the enemy almost had reached the Volga. The counterattack began early in the morning, before dawn, and it was supported by artillery from the left bank of the river and the Katyusha regiment of Polkovnik or Colonel Yerokhin. We did not capture a large area, but the results were impressive. A flamethrower tank burned 3 enemy tanks, and the 2 medium tanks suppressed the enemy in 2 trenches, which a rifleman immediately captured. End of quote. The KV-8 was indeed aptly prepared for urban combat. It must have been indeed terrifying to be on the receiving end of the tank's flame jets. In the end of 1942, the 235th Flamethrower Tank Brigade fought mainly for the Krasny Oktyabr or Red October plant, and later helped defend against Generaloberst Hermann Hoth's forces in Unternehmen Wintergewitter or Operation Winter Storm near Kotelnikovo. According to Soviet sources, the 235th Flamethrower Tank Brigade, together with the 234th Tank Regiment, destroyed some 50 enemy tanks, 30 guns and other equipment, causing more than 500 German casualties. After the Soviet victory in Stalingrad, it was renamed as the 31st Guards Separate Flamethrower Tank Brigade. In any case, by 1943, the KV-1 and KV-8 tanks were no longer produced, and the main flamethrower tank was the OT-34, based of course on the T-34. The KV-8, just as the KV-1, was finally a successful design, and despite its many shortcomings, it played an important role according to the small number of tanks produced. I hope you liked this episode about the unknown KV-8 tank. And if you didn't like the episode, well, thank you so much for watching this far.